I'm super excited. A lot of people are very interested in this panel. I am personally. So without saying too much, I'm going to turn it over to Jan, who's going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to learn more about hydrogen.
Great. Well, welcome back from lunch. I know that the food coma might be kicking in soon, so let's start the afternoon with a topic that's full of color and energy. And that's quite literally because we're going to talk about the hydrogen rainbow. And for those of you who are not too familiar with the concept of hydrogen rainbow, we have an image on the screen here explaining what each color of hydrogen represents. And I will also have our panelists, 2 founders and 1 investor in the clean hydrogen space, explaining what color of hydrogen they're working on. Max, I will start with you. What color of hydrogen are you working on?
Well, thank you very much for having me. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I'm Max Pieri. I'm leading Tulum Energy, a methane pyrolysis company, and it's turquoise hydrogen. What is turquoise hydrogen? What is methane pyrolysis? It's about splitting the molecule of gas using a heat source to make hydrogen, clean hydrogen, and solid carbon.
Marty, what about you?
Yeah, and I'm Marty Neese. I'm the CEO of Verdagy, which is a green hydrogen, hence the name, Verdagy. So it's a green hydrogen, electrolytic hydrogen production company specializing in large industrial scale electrolysis. So think 20 to 40 megawatt size electrolyzers at a minimum, and then you scale up from there. And purpose built from the ground up to pair with renewables. So whatever that stripe is around the outside there, that's us, the green stripe.
And Christina, I know you're an investor, so what color of hydrogen does your team focus on?
Multiple colors. Hi everyone, thank you very much for the invitation for TDK. First of all, I'm Christina Karapataki. I'm a partner with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and we invest in climate technologies that can significantly reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And we've been active since 2017 with 110 portfolio companies and growing. So in terms of the colors, I think I'm looking here at the chart. We've invested in electrolysis, so we've definitely taken grain. We've done methane pyrolysis with a combination of blue and turquoise. We've done natural occurring hydrogen, so that's the white. And then we've also done photocatalysis, which I don't think has a color yet, but it would be in the yellowish area.
That's great. So we have turquoise, green, and the whole rainbow represented here. My first question is something I think has been widely discussed this year, which is project financing for first of a kind or early of the kind climate tech projects. Given the capital intensive nature of those projects, sometimes it's not sufficient to only raise equity financing for the company to scale. So for our 2 founders here, we'd love to hear, how do you prepare to get ready for clean hydrogen project financing?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think that how to finance first of a kind projects has been a very hot topic this year, but it's going to be a very hot topic for the time being, because it's a hard thing to do, and it's certainly crucial for the success of every startup. At the end, you need 3 things, right? You need a technology that is reasonably de-risked. You need off-take contracts, because you need a contractual framework that locks in the cash flows of the company to reassure the investors that they're on their investment. And the second thing, also based on my experience, you need some scale. All the investors are there, for the majority of the investors are there also for the project equity investors. It's not easy to finance project if they are below a certain scale, also in terms of dollar value, below a few tens of millions of dollar value. So these are the 3 things that are needed. If I can say something, probably here the right place to say, or probably no, because I risk preaching a little bit to the converse, but I expect an increasingly bigger role from a strategic investor on finding first-of-a-kind projects. If you think about it, the strategic rationale for every strategic investor, either they're doing venture capital for with a defensive rationale or an offensive rationale, is always to become early adopters of a technology. And I believe that the best way also for them to become early adopters of our technologies is to help a startup developing and deploying the first of a kind, and to assure that this is successful. And helping them with that, helping them also finding customers. If they cannot be the customer themselves, helping them finding customers within their ecosystem is something that is extremely valuable for every investor. I was talking yesterday to Nicolas. I said, the best gift we can give to you is to find you a customer and off-taker. It's certainly true. This is the best thing that you can do. As it's finding the first customer is probably what represents a quantum leap for every startup, especially for someone who develops capital-intensive technologies as we do.
So I agree with everything you just said. That is for sure front and center. In addition to that, our particular approach, based on the way we founded the company, was we had to really leverage some early assets that we had, which were around a pilot plant at scale. And that was really going as rapidly as possible to build a large-scale representation of the commercial unit, and then develop and refine as much of the representative data as possible that would mimic a first of a kind. So for us, our pilot plant performance, it's a 25,000 square foot pilot plant with a 2 megawatt electrolyzer running in it for tens of thousands of hours now. That is the first way to get confidence from strategic investors, from prospective off-takers, and from investors. So really dialing in and showing that the product works and the approach has data that supports why they should do something.
That's great. And Christina, how do you prepare your portfolio company to navigate the folk financing landscape and help them cross it?
Yeah, so we see the equity financing of the large rounds where they enter this valley of death or semi-available capital, large Series B, early Series C, is typically at the same time that the same companies, especially hydrogen, is also looking for project financing. So what we direct them, especially in early rounds, is some of the things that already were talked about. One is we really focus on very strong syndicates, both financials and strategics. All of our hydrogen companies have had strategic investors early on in their life. The other one is we tell them to treat their pilot project as if it is a commercial contract and use that to prepare for what will be asked from them when they're doing the first of a kind commercial, right? So work with EPC companies and try really to quantify what your uncertainty and overage typically on CapEx cost is, and use your pilot as if to do the same level of rigor on your EPC work as what you're going to need to do for your first commercial. Put the right structure for what your offtake contract should look like, and of course hit the right check marks on the technical performance of that pilot. So that was obviously touched on by Marty. It sounds like he's doing exactly that with 10,000 hours at 2 megawatts. And then the last part is to start working with project financiers early before you need them. Try and understand what are the metrics and what are they going to need to do in order for them to enter into project financing. And there are quite a few groups out there that are willing to do top co-equity early and look at project financing later. So those are groups that we try and co-invest with often.
Right. Yeah, I think we have a panel later on folk financing, and some of the speakers can dive into that more. So it sounds like offtake agreement is an important part to get to project financing. And I know steel industry is a big potential offtaker for clean hydrogen. H2 Green Steel has invested $6 billion into their DRI-EAF facility that uses green hydrogen as a reducing agent instead of coal. Aside from H2 Green Steel, do you see other steel makers also getting ready for clean hydrogen adoption? And I know, Max, this is something you have spent time diving into. Do you have a view on this?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, Tulum is a spin-out of a big industrial group, Techint, that is very, very active in steelmaking. And as a matter of fact, the key components of our technologies are taken from the steelmaking industry, a piece of machinery that are already used and commercially available in the steelmaking industry and repurposed. But in any case, the steel industry is certainly a very, very promising market. If you think about it, first of all, it's very carbon-intensive market, and it's probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest sector to decarbonize. The demand for steel in the years to come, in the next decades, is supposed to increase slightly but steadily. But the demand for green steel is supposed to grow dramatically over the next years. So just to give you an idea, I don't know how most of you are familiar with how the steel is made. So you can make steel, new steel in two ways, in a blast furnace, and it's very, very carbon intensive operation, or you can do it with a DRI plus an electric arc furnace. In a DRI, you take pellets of iron oxide, you reduce it using a reducing feedstock, which can be natural gas or hydrogen, and then you smelt these pellets in an electric arc furnace. So there is the potential to really decarbonize the production of iron. So if you look at also the projections, if in terms of demand, so the demand for hydrogen from the steelmaking industry can grow to 15 to 35 million tons per year. So which is, if you think about 15 to 35% of the current production. So it's a very, very big pie. And we are, I am seeing signals that the industry is going this direction everywhere. Our first pilot for Tulum is gonna be built in the facilities of a steelmaking player. Why? Because they are very much interested in potentially using hydrogen once the technology is de-risked and for commercial purposes, and to use it for the DRI. What is important, again, probably to underline, is that what also steelmaking industry needs is scale. So they need large volumes of hydrogen. If you think about the typical size of a DRI, we are talking about 1.5 million tons of iron per year. It's a lot, and in order to, if you wanna use hydrogen as a reducing factor to make this volumes of steel, you need more than 250 tons of hydrogen per day, which is a very large quantity. So very promising sector, but certainly not easy to address. Scale is key to really make a difference in this sector.
And in the green steel sector, there are definitely some startups. Well, H2 Green Steel I don't consider a startup anymore, but there are definitely some startups in the space. But there are also large corporates. If you look at the announcements from ArcelorMittal, ThyssenKrupp, POSCO, all of them are talking about demonstrations of either higher hydrogen blending into natural gas, DRI, EAF, or direct hydrogen use in a blast furnace. So we're seeing a lot of the industrial players moving in that direction. Not solving the feedstock, which is what this panel is supposed to solve, but having the technology so that it's able to be used in the steel sector.
Yeah. And aside from steel industry, are there other sectors you see can benefit from clean hydrogen availability? Anyone?
So I can start. For sure, sustainable aviation fuels is another very, very promising market. Here the projections are extremely interesting. Some are projected that we can get to 65 million tons of hydrogen per year at 2050. If you think about it, this is also, so the infrastructure is already there. The engine of the planes do not need to be changed too much to be able to use sustainable aviation fuel. So it's a very promising market. And it's also a very capital-intensive sector because aviation accounts for around 2% of the total carbon equivalent emissions. So certainly is another market that can grow a lot in terms of demand for hydrogen.
So I'll answer slightly differently, which is if you think back to your rainbow chart for a second, it's important to see the order of magnitude of the size of each of those colors by contribution. So gray today is about 98% of all the colors or more, which means that methane gas is used to make hydrogen to the tune of 75 million tons a year of existing hydrogen demand with existing industry feedstocks. So if you just start there and you say, what can we do to decarbonize oil and gas refining or ammonia or fertilizer manufacturing, et cetera, that gives you a really straightforward path of where to go and how to make a material impact really, really quickly and start taking some of that 98% methane gas produced hydrogen and replacing it with something else. I personally prefer green because it's here, it's now, it's ready. And then as other colors come online and start making a more pronounced contribution, we can catch up and start displacing more of that gray.
Yeah, and if you look at within this 98%, which end uses use the most hydrogen, then you'll come up with petrochemicals and ammonia, right? Those are the two end uses by far where you're using gray today. And for us, where we're focusing from a startup and investment perspective, besides steel that we've already spoken about, is the ammonia sector. And that's both for the synthesis of ammonia and also for decomposition. So how do you use the ammonia as the energy carrier for the hydrogen, especially in areas where you don't have the infrastructure and it's cheaper to transport, for example, in Asia when you're looking at replacing LNG. So that's the area where we're spending more time, but in both of those sectors, it needs to scale up to replacing something Haber-Bosch or giving the volume of hydrogen needed today in Haber-Bosch. So we're also needing and focusing on technologies that can scale.
Correct. Great. I hear the scale get emphasized a lot. So let's shift gear to talk about some of the challenges that hydrogen production might face. One challenge people say is the amount of energy. Especially for non-naturally occurring sources. There's a lot of energy that's required to produce hydrogen, and that might hinder where the project can get deployed and its unit economics. I wonder if there are any method to help mitigate the energy demand and the pressure that hydrogen production can have on the grid. I know, Marty, this is something you spend a lot of time thinking and working on Verdagy. Yeah.
Not just a lot of time thinking about it. I've spent the last 20 years trying to do something about it from the solar side. So if you think about where we've come from on renewable energy, I think last year we had 450 gigawatts of solar produced in 1 year. So a similar amount of wind, hundreds of gigawatts of wind. So you're starting to approach 2 gigawatts per day of renewable energy being manufactured and produced around the world. So what to do? To me, the most obvious thing to do is to take an electrolyzer technology that pairs well with renewables, purpose-built, and couple them. And if you want to reduce the load on the grid, and if you want to do things to take advantage of decarbonization, take advantage of the 2 gigawatts of renewables that are going in every single day and figure out a way to electrolytically produce hydrogen using that low cost, lower than fossil fuel cost source, and then replace existing hydrogen, if you will. And it does require significant thoughtfulness around siting. Like, you can't just necessarily run behind the meter and do off-grid as a first step, but you certainly can do very large scale electrolytic hydrogen and pipeline it into dedicated hydrogen pipelines that are available in a bunch of different locations. That will change the equation of how much electricity is needed, whether it's grid power or whether it's renewables or the combination of the two. And then if your technology is appropriate, you can couple with the intermittent resources and optimize the unit economics by load following appropriately. So essentially, the electrolyzer becomes a grid services enabler, and you can ramp up when you need to, take advantage of low cost, let's say low cost renewables when they're available, when you're trying to avoid carbon intensive grid costs or power, you can load shed. And taken together, the right kind of electrolyzer with that kind of thoughtfulness can also be a grid services component, and grids will pay you for that capability to integrate and be part of their load balancing and load following program. So all in all, I think there's a way to take renewables and make them more valuable with the right kind of use case on hydrogen, and take full advantage of the deflationary costs of scaled renewables through time. And that's what we're seeking to do with the approach that we're promulgating.
Putting together these relationships with power providers and utilities should not be underestimated and done fairly early, because we talked earlier about first-of-a-kind projects and how do you get something to FID. For a lot of our companies that have renewable power as their feedstock, whether they're electrolyzers making hydrogen, whether they're doing industrial heat, whether they're doing green steel, we're seeing putting together those PPAs thoughtfully and being able to access the cheap electrons for the amount of time that you need to access them, in the location that you need to access them, with the right interconnect and transformer availability, and putting that puzzle together is it's just as important as building your electrolyzer technology, if not more important, because we're currently seeing projects being delayed, not because the hydrogen technology is delayed, but because the power stakeholder is going to provide power to that project is not where you want them to be at the right time. And that's right now for first-of-a-kind projects in these sectors, it's I would say the major delay and bottleneck that we're seeing is power.
We need a more holistic approach to think about deployment. And we briefly mentioned naturally occurring hydrogen, which is geologic hydrogen. That's also a topic I think attract a lot of attention this year. Many believe that it can have less energy required and lower cost profile. Given that, do you see geologic hydrogen as a competitive solution that can disrupt the adoption of hydrogen of other colors?
Well, if the question is for me, I'm not an expert of geological hydrogen. I'm certainly very much fascinated about this opportunity, because that would be also a completely a philosophical change, because it would turn hydrogen in something that you really discover instead of something that you make, and it would be a primary source of energy. So I think that I read several numbers, several statistics about what the resources of hydrogen could or could not be. It's about also to find out how many of these resources can be translated into reserves, so something that's really producible. I don't know what the cost of producing these reserves could really be, but certainly is something that is very interesting also for me intellectually, coming from oil and gas industry. The idea of using tools and models, geological models that are used currently for exploring for oil and gas, for exploring for hydrogen is something certainly fascinating. For me, it's harder to gauge the real potential and the real scalability of this technology, because I don't have enough information on it.
I can't really comment on white hydrogen or geologic hydrogen, but I can comment on a couple of things. Bernd Hyde said something in the last session about the transition from the 80-20 of development to the 50-50 of commercialization, and then the 80-20 of scale up. I fully concur with the findings of what Hydrogen Council and McKinsey have discovered as their Moore's Law, if you will. We see 100%, a 70% cost reduction of hydrogen equipment and levelized cost of hydrogen on the horizon, with and without incentives. So fossil parity is achievable with everything we know today. And so that's good news. In my estimation, that means that we can get on with the scaling and start really driving the cost to be competitive with and without incentives, while at the same time, the more challenging technically, Christina would be able to comment on that, of other things, seems like a great alternative or supplemental addition. Great, it takes all the colors. And in the meantime, we've got an opportunity to dramatically lower the costs of what we already have in front of us. Wherever there's wind, water, and sunshine, we've got pretty good access to surface hydrogen, if you want to call it that. It's not geologic, but it's 70% of the planet. So
I'll talk about white hydrogen. The thing is, because as I said earlier, we've invested across the spectrum of colors, but we are really excited about the potential of white hydrogen and geologic hydrogen in general. The technology is early. There's a significant amount of risk, and anytime you're looking about exploration, I come from the oil and gas sector once upon a time, so there's definitely risks anytime you're drilling below ground to find something. So we're at the early stages of that industry and how it's going to evolve, but the potential of it can be huge, and it could be, in my view, a step change of how the hydrogen industry in general would develop, because we think if exploration is successful, there is a clear path to something well below $2 per kilogram of hydrogen, which would be very instrumental for the industry. And that's the reason, and there's also obviously geographic dependency. With geologic hydrogen, you're only limited to specific geographies. You're also limited if you're looking at green hydrogen, because you need to have the power access and the pipeline. Not as limited on the methane pyrolysis stuff. You can put large plants anywhere. Right? So we do view that there is space for all of them in different applications and different end uses. But we're really excited about the potential where hydrogen and white hydrogen could go.
And they might come up at different timelines, so we can have a good pipeline moving forward. Maybe one last question before we shift to the audience is that, do you think we have all the solution we need to really have clean hydrogen economy to take off? Or do we still need disruptive innovations, whether it's on the production side or maybe downstream to the storage or transportation of hydrogen?
Not yet. I think there's a lot of technology that can come to the market earlier, right? For example, electrolyzers. But there's a lot of potential, and we're continuing to invest in hydrogen. One of the areas, and I don't remember if the color was on the rainbow, but it's orange hydrogen, which is stimulated geologic hydrogen production. So not just find it in place, but stimulate it. And I think that one, there is we'll add orange. So
we need to expand the rainbow here.
And then the other area that we're spending a lot of focus is the entire value chain of transport, storage, and distribution. And it should not be underlooked. There was actually a really interesting paper that came out either this week or last week in Joule that was talking about the impacts of storage and distribution to the end use cases, regardless of how cheap production can get. That with current technologies on storage and distribution, you might still not be competitive for certain use cases. So we're looking across all of those three for new innovation.
And I'll just speak from a solar past. What happened in solar, the technology of photovoltaics was reduced to practice 50 years before it scaled. And once it started scaling, you needed 1,000 innovations to cost reduce it. And you needed every single penny torn in half for as much as you could pay attention to it. It turned into thousands of small innovations that got the cost down 90% in 15 years. In addition to, like, there's all kinds of revolutionary stuff going on still to this day that are looking for better ways to do things. There's also, let's call it micro disruptions that happen every single day in companies where you have to tear pennies in half to get the cost out. And those scooped into a basket can be hugely disruptive as a capability if you can harness it. But it's a lot of day-to-day grunt work on little small changes of how to get yields up, costs down, material sciences to do better. Every little component has to be questioned from end to end and cost reduced end to end. It's you can drive out significant costs with that kind of an approach.
For me, I totally agree with what Christina and Marty just said. So I believe that the hydrogen economy is still at its infancy right now. The expectation for the market, for the hydrogen market, is at least to double over the next 2 decades, and probably to quintuple. So we need more technologies. We need to try to square the triangle of affordability, sustainability, and reliability also for the hydrogen. So for me, even more colorful rainbow, and even more kaleidoscopic rainbow is just very much welcome, and more innovation is needed along the entire value chain, including transportation, distribution, and storage.
That's great. Okay, I think I'll open up the question to our audience here.
Christina, it's a question for you. If the electrolyzers are getting towards less than $2 per kilo, do you still think you need white hydrogen?
I think the geographic dependency of those technologies matters, and also the speed, right? And then also the volume, right? So it's not just how low you can get in cost, but it also what volume can you service, right? And where are you getting the access to the cheap electricity, and then what transportation are you using, or what's your end use? Which is why we think the multiple technologies on this rainbow, methane pyrolysis included, photocatalysis included, if you're going to replace 80 megatons of CO2 and of hydrogen use in the economy, there's space for a lot of them, not just one.
Are you finding that the regulatory mechanisms and sort of how the bulk power system is working is keeping up with that thesis, and for an electrolyzer to be a grid resource?
So far, the grid operators in ERCOT, for example, have been quite responsive, quite cooperative, and willing to work with the technology itself. From a policy standpoint, having some treasury guidelines that are done and dusted would be the most significant thing that could happen. And that'll get a whole bunch of developers to be able to sort their portfolio and say what's above the line, what's a boundary, and what's below the line of what they can go forward with. And in the land of it's really difficult to find off-takers and the right kind of fit, the ability to get treasury guidelines that gives everybody the playing field for the next 10, 15 years, I think is going to have a substantial catalytic effect. And hopefully, it's rumored that is a lame duck session activity. I won't put you on the spot to see what you know or how, but if that happens, we're thinking that there's going to be a bunch of pent-up demand that gets sorted and launched much more quickly than perhaps people are thinking. As much as it's a rainbow, it's also winds. So there's all kinds of winds in the hydrogen universe. Tailwinds, headwinds, crosswinds. Right now it's all headwinds waiting for treasury guidelines, and I think that could easily turn into tailwinds in a nanosecond, and we're preparing for that eventuality.
I have no insights. DOE gave input to Treasury, but it's kind of Treasury's.
So I understand there's beer at 5 o'clock, so I'll get you a beer and see if we can have an off the record conversation, off the camera conversation.
Hey, Marty, I'm going to apologize for doubling down on this a little bit, but on the load following piece, there's, like you mentioned, obviously the opportunity to significantly lower the cost per dollar, or cost per kilogram rather, by doing that load following and by intermittently running your electrolyzers. But from a customer perspective, I mean, maybe to use the steel example, if you're a DRI plant, you don't want to run your plant intermittently because your
Oh, yes, we do.
If you're a DRI plant, you would like to, because my understanding.
No,
you do for sure, but I guess from a steelmaker's perspective, if they're buying your hydrogen, they want 24-hour capacity. So how are you thinking about, is it building storage and upsizing your capacity? Is it, in which case you have to upsize your CapEx considerably? Are there just particular markets that are more, better context for that kind of intermittent electrolyzer operation? How are you thinking about that trade-off?
Yeah, so think wherever there's deep and abundant renewable penetration, that's an ideal load following scenario for a dynamically operating electrolyzer. So you can monetize that. Think California duck curve, giant belly, skinny neck, like a dynamically operating electrolyzer can harvest the belly and not deal with the neck, right? Avoid the peaks, harvest the low cost. You have to do that with the right CapEx basis of the electrolyzer. If the CapEx of the electrolyzer is burdensome, it doesn't work. You can't run at anything other than the highest capacity factor possible. So that's an optimization thing. With respect to steel and applications that require firming, for sure you do not want to be an intermittent resource without the appropriate chemical and battery electric buffers and storages around you to make sure that you can always deliver firmed downstream requirements. So it just has to be thoughtfully done. There's a reason why H2 green steel runs on hydroelectric, of course, it's super efficient way to do renewable energy. That's not going to be everywhere. Not everywhere is going to be able to run a steel plant on hydroelectric. So for us, steel is not our first path. There are better suited technologies like solid oxides or methane pyrolysis or others that probably fit that duty cycle better. That's not to say that we won't get there at some point, but that's probably not the center of our bullseye.
Also going back to transmission and distribution, if you look at the planned hydrogen projects, and we'll see which ones of those get built, we see a lot of integration in locations where you have cheap available power, but also availability of salt caverns for ultra cheap storage, right? So you can have the buffer on the battery side, but you can have the buffer on a different form of storage. Again, very restricted in terms of geography, and where do you find that stars aligning location?
Or you can also look at the dedicated hydrogen pipelines as another manner of buffering and storage.
I think the question I have is, given that, as we discussed, all the customers in the space tend to be heavy industrials as of now, do they prefer to own and operate equipment? Or is the mature business model going to be buying hydrogen, or a mix of both potentially? And maybe which industries you think might fit into what category better?
So if again, this very very good question. I think it depends. So what they are really interested in. So this large industrial customer, what they are really interested in. I was talking about before, the triangle: affordability, sustainability, and reliability. Probably reliability is the most important thing for them, because hydrogen is a feedstock for them, and the economic damage that comes to them for not having a reliable source is something that they care about more probably than the price point of the hydrogen, even more. So it depends on the customer itself. So we, for instance, in Tulum, we are going for a build, own, and operated business model, which kind of also relieves the customer from the financial burden of taking the capex on the balance sheets. On the other hand, they want to have plenty of comfort about the reliability of the supply, because at this point in time, only at this point in time, we can get also into this long-term off-take contracts that everybody is looking for to make the project sustainable financially. But the key is to guarantee the customer that you're going to provide a reliable source of hydrogen.
Yeah, from our perspective, you have to do a really great job at building equipment. You have to do a really great job of servicing the equipment. And if you do those things really, really well and really world class, it opens the door to the other business model of being a participant opportunistically of molecules where it makes sense. It's not unlike industries of the past. Sorry for the solar analogies, but many vertically integrated solar companies also sold electrons at some point in their evolution. So I think there's going to be really strong requirement to get good at the first thing, service it well, and then you can open up a bit more on the business model opportunities that maybe are a little bit more like a build, own, operate.
What we're seeing at the beginning, while the companies are in pilot demonstration, technology development, first of a kind plant, is that the technology companies need to become project developers for those first projects, right? So it is the build, own, operate where you end up selling the hydrogen, not selling the equipment that makes the hydrogen. But the goal would be to transition out of that with great operability and results and repeatability.
Yeah, and thank you to your breakthrough colleagues on the catalyst side. They've been doing a great job of helping companies like ours navigate first-of-a-kind development structures so that you can get off the ground and get going and then earn your way into whatever business model you aspire to. And Breakthrough Energy Catalyst has done really groundbreaking work there, so really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And just for background, that's one of the legs of the stool within the Breakthrough Energy organization that is exclusively focused on financing first-of-a-kind projects across the climate industry And they're doing a lot of work kind of putting out there that they have a presentation that's public, the 12 keys of commercializations for project financing, that's helping take companies step by step. What would project financiers need to see, and also provide capital for those projects. Thank you.
Oh, and you have one more question.
It's not a board meeting, is it, Anil? Sorry. I'm just kidding.
Is there a possibility that breakthrough catalysts can be more sort of open to many, like outside of Breakthrough Energy Ventures portfolio? Because many of our portfolio companies would like to learn how to get the project financing and so on and so forth.
So it is open, right? It is open to everyone. The presentation is public, and also out of their first 3 projects, 2 of them are not Breakthrough Energy Ventures companies. So their purpose is to look across the entire industry and help projects. So that one, yes, it's a resource, and then companies also apply directly. So there's no link there. So, and in terms of kind of education, they do that all the time with public conferences and communication with startups directly. I think the best example is that Marty brought them up before I did, and Verdagy is not a BEV portfolio company, so they're definitely out there.
Just want our portfolio companies to hear that.
It was a bit of a board meeting question, just not yours.
Great. I think that wraps up our panel. I want to thank our panelists for sharing your valuable insights in the challenges and opportunities in the clean hydrogen space. I think there's still work to be done, but the future of clean hydrogen is clear, holds tremendous promises. And thank you everyone for sticking with us through your post-launch energy dip. I hope this conversation recharges you, and let's keep the momentum going. Have a great rest of your afternoon.